I want to start by saying we are at the outset of a new era of tri-sector cooperation. I hate that word, but I don't like public-private partnerships because I don't think it captures the full dimensions of all three sectors, of the civic sector, the private sector, and the public sector. Government, the full range of civil organizations, and the full range of for-profit organizations. President Obama actually referred to a public-private partnership in a national election debate. He said, when they were talking about Egypt, he said, you know, we are reaching out to entrepreneurs. Now, I jumped. I'm sure not everybody did. But what he was talking about is the Partnership for a New Beginning, something we created in the State Department, which is the State Department, the Aspen Institute, and a committee of 16 CEOs, heads of university, heads of NGOs. We have Morgan Stanley, we have Cisco, we have Coca-Cola, all there working on how to reach out to Egyptian society, to the societies of 5 Muslim-majority countries. So for once, actually in that moment where he's debating high politics, he actually referred as a signature of his administration to something that is pioneering in the realm of tri-sector collaboration. I want to argue that what we're seeing is not just a difference in degree, but actually a difference in kind. And I want to make a couple of points about why I think we're really at the dawning of a new era in terms of the way we think about solving global problems. So the first change really is, I think, a change in the way business thinks about these kinds of collaborations. And the people who are somewhat new to this field keep saying, well, you know, corporate social responsibility has to be more than charity. It really has to be, you know, at the core of business interests. You have to make a business case. And the representatives from CSR offices roll their eyes every time. And the reason they do is that's very old news for them. They are saying, look, we're already there. We're actually ahead of you in government in many cases. We understand that to be able to do business in the communities we're in around the world, thinking about that larger community, thinking about that larger society is absolutely a part of our business case. Indeed, and this I think is really new, a couple of those CEOs said, our only question is whether we need government at all. Second is a change in government, a little slower, but definitely there. So when we first used to talk about public-private or tri-sector collaboration with business audiences, I would get the standard response, your definition of a partnership is you define the agenda and then you ask us to pay for it. That is what you mean by a public-private collaboration. And there's an element of truth in that, in the way, you know, obviously government is short on resources, and these are very complex problems, and it's hard to let go of the policy agenda setting. That's what government gets to do, is to set policy, and it's very hard to back up and understand that if these collaborations are really going to work, everybody has to be around the table at the outset of setting the policy. Third change that leads me to say this is a difference of degree rather than a difference in kind is really a change in mindset, a much broader way of thinking. We are gradually coming to understand these kinds of complex problems, whether they are food security or water security or health broadly or education or the whole panoply of not just development problems, but I think of them as foreign policy problems that are rooted in social and economic behaviors. We are gradually coming to understand that these are ecosystems. Ignore biology. Let me just talk about socialization. So if you talk to my mother about how she thought about who she was in the 1950s, she'll say, well, I didn't have an identity. Not I separate from being a daughter or a wife or a mother. I was defined by my relationships to others. I was defined by my responsibilities to others. Men are much more likely to have been socialized to say, you need to separate yourself from those relationships. You need to define yourself and your ambition and blaze your path. So I'm going to put to you, provocatively at least, that as more and more women enter the workplace and rise. And I certainly see plenty of women in the social responsibility parts of various businesses. They are very good at this kind of interconnected, holistic thinking.
You're clearly an expert in academics, you're an expert in foreign policy. Why did you write the article?
I had spent my life on one side of this issue, and my experience in Washington and my decision not to quit, because I served my full 2 years. I would not have ever quit sooner than 2 years because I was the first woman in the position, but not to go on and be considered for promotion, which is really what I did, I never would have predicted that I would have done that. And nobody who knew me would have predicted I would have done that, including my family and probably my husband. I think they thought, I've always been passionate about foreign policy, and if I'd had an opportunity to go on, I'd have found a way to make it work. When I realized, no, that's not what I want to do, it led me to see the world from a different perspective.
So why did this strike such a chord?
It's not a message that my generation wanted to hear, although what I've realized is all the women of my generation say, or the women ahead of me, 10 years ahead, say, my daughter sent it to me, right? So that's another reason it went so viral, was this younger women sending it to older women and their mothers, their mentors, and saying, these are the questions we're asking. The last thing I'll say is I think it had a huge impact for something that has nothing to do with women and women particularly, or women and men and parents and children. It has to do with the fact, as a professor at Penn said to me recently, I don't know anybody who didn't wish that they had more sanity in their life. And I think balance, for me, that's work and family, but for our entire society, it's the difference between making a living and having a life.
One of the criticisms I heard the most was, why is this a women's issue? It's 2012, right?
We have an equal number of women coming out of school and an equal number of women going into the workforce, and we have 20% at the top in the corporate sector. The only place where men and women are equally represented at the top, at the very top, the only place I know of, are the Ivy League university presidents. There are 4 women and 4 men. That is not an accident. That is because I am in the most flexible profession, the profession that does allow you to schedule your work when you want it. Even as a dean, you have much more flexibility than a corporate sector. And in that one area, you have an equal number of men and women at the top. Everywhere else, even though it should be a men and a women's issue, and it's becoming more of a men and women's issue, what's actually happening is it's women who, for whatever reasons, are the ones stepping out or making the career sacrifices that means they are then no longer in the pool to be considered. At the same time, what I absolutely believe, and one reason I'm writing a book, is all the men who have written to me saying, if you think it's hard taking maternity leave or flex time or leaving at 6 to pick up your kids from daycare as a woman, try being a man. Try saying, no, I'm sorry, I can't work late, and I'm sorry, I can't go out for a beer with the boss, and no, I'm sorry, I really can't take that trip because I want to be with my kids. So I now understand the gender stereotyping around men who are actually trying to be equal partners is something we equally have to fight.
How should companies kind of take on this issue and help to change some of these practices?
I would say start with honest conversation, and you'll come up with your own solutions. The other thing I would say is look at the corporations that are really making it work. The Sloan Foundation funds these awards called When Work Works, and there are over 200 corporations have gotten those awards, and they're doing all sorts of extraordinary things.
We've talked a lot this week about millennials as consumers. We haven't really talked as much about millennials as joining the workforce. And maybe as your closing thoughts, what does this look like? Does that mean this is going to become more of an issue, as we know that millennials have different priorities as they're thinking about work and flexibility and where and who they want to work for? Or is this going to become more of an issue because of those issues?
What I see is such a radically different way of thinking. It's as big a divide between that generation and the way my generation thinks as the 60s were from the 50s establishment generation. It's just expressed differently. The assumption about what they can do to begin with. This is the most empowered group of people I've ever seen because they live with technology that allows them to start a social enterprise and connect to people around the world and have a revolution. They have a far more collegial view of how work gets done.